Welcome to the Bell Cow Author Roundup podcast, where we celebrate Minnesota's incredible fiction authors and the stories that make our literary scene so vibrant. I'm Rob Jung.
And I'm Michael MacBride. Together, we're the team behind Bell Cow Productions and the Bell Cow Catalog, a digital catalog designed to connect Minnesota authors with readers, libraries, and indie bookstores.
The catalog will be heading to all 377 Minnesota libraries, 80 plus indie bookstores, plus those in border cities such as Sioux Falls, Fargo, Superior, and La Crosse.
And now with this podcast, we get to bring those amazing voices to life. Every episode features one of our herd members talking about their books, their writing journey, and the stories behind the stories.
And before we start, let us apologize for all the cow-related puns you're about to hear.
All right, let's dig in. Thanks for joining us on the Bell Cow Roundup podcast. Today we are hosting Scott Welvaert. Thank you so much for joining us. He lives over in Chaska, just across the river from me. He's the author of the Lost Zenith series, and also part of Skywater Publishing. So welcome, Scott. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. I'm glad to join you guys and talk about books, talk about writing. It's my jam, man.
But tell us, before we get into your books, of which there are many, tell us about Skywater Publishing.
Sure, yeah, it was kind of our pandemic project, our sourdough making phase where a bunch of us were like, we had all the components of like an indie publishing house where I do marketing as I call it my day walker job. And then we had other people that knew how to actually do the operational side of putting a book together, layout and all that. And then we had a bunch of editor friends. And so we were all just kind of sitting there and we're like, maybe we could do this. Maybe we could do this and offer something a little more lucrative for authors where we could, give them a better deal than what major publishers do. And then also choose the books that we want to publish, and kind of give other people platforms, like we just recently are working with a couple of comic book artists for a new graphic novel series or a comic book series, which was really cool to me because I'm as my hat says, I'm a huge comic book nerd from when I was a kid, so when we got that, it was really cool. But yeah, it was just kind of our sourdough for the pandemic, and then we keep doing it because we love it. You learn so much about the different facets of publishing. Like I just do marketing, but I learned so much about, the production side of things, as far as how to get it ready for Amazon, how to get it ready for distributors and stuff. So it's been a lot of fun, a lot of work, but at the same time, I mean, retirement's coming up soon. I'd rather do that than sit around and watch TV. So
Definitely. I'm trying to picture what the mother looks like sitting in the refrigerator for your sourdough, but
Yeah, really. Yeah, what kind of crack do you keep her in?
Well, I'm curious, and I'm sure listeners would like to know a bit more about you, like background, just general background, and how you kind of come to writing. Was it something you always did? Was it something pre-pandemic that you were leading up to? Give us a bit of that backstory.
Sure. Yeah, I had always wanted. My mom has this memory she tells about me often, where when I was a child, I loved reading, and I read like every book in the house, and I pestered her for more and more, and she says, you made me so goddamn mad. I just started buying books, and then you would read all those, and then I finally said, what could just not stop him from reading, but just stop her from having to buy more books. So she bought me this encyclopedia set, and I read each one cover to cover, learned about history, and I was fascinated with like Native American legends and folklore and stuff like that, and that led to some stories. And then I read a lot of stuff at a young age, like Jules Verne and H.G. Wells. I love science fiction and fantasy, just because it brought a whole different look, to the imagination and stuff, and how certain things that Jules Verne wrote about and H.G. Wells wrote about, and and even Arthur C. Clarke, the concepts that they wrote about as fiction, are now possible in real life, like the submarine and water propulsion in space and stuff like that. So I read a lot of books, and I wrote stories all the time. And then when high school graduation came around, and I remember being at my high school graduation and having people say, "Oh, what are you going to do for a living?" And I'm like, I would say writer, and they all said, no, you should find something, that makes you some money, and as a 17, 18-year-old, I'm like, God, that's such a drag, but so I listened to them, and I went to school. I went to Mankato State University there, Minnesota State University, and I said, I'm going to be an engineer because I took a little bit of engineering in high school, like one class, and got an A in it, and actually what it wasn't even engineering, it was drafting. It was like drawing of stuff. And that's what
More
I thought
architecture almost.
yeah, you know, and I thought that's what engineering was. So I signed up for the engineering program at Mankato, and I spent 2 years failing classes, calculus and math classes and science classes. And I mean, I took calculus 3 times. I'm just a glutton for punishment. I took it 3 times, failed it 3 times because I couldn't grasp the concepts. And I was like, and finally something just clicked in my head. I'm like, I don't think I'm meant to be an engineer. Math and science is my thing. And I went back to like when I was a kid and a teenager, and I was writing stories, and I said, I'm going to take an intro to creative writing class and just see, where that goes, And so I took it, and it was actually the first creative writing class I had was with Terry Davis, author of Vision Quest. And so I was like, this is going to be cool. And the first day we get into class, we're sitting in this, it was one of the night classes, 4 hours, whatever. And I sat down, and Terry's desk that he was using happened to be on my left. And so he said, for this 4 hours, all we're going to do is we're going to go around, and each of us are going to tell a story that touched our hearts. And so I was like, great. And he said, and we're going to start on my left. So I'm like, son of a. So I had to spend the whole time just sitting there and then stewing about what am I going to say. And then really, I was so new to it. I'm like, I don't think I have a story that touched my heart. And then when it came time for my story, I decided to tell a story about when I was journeying with my dad, and he was like pontificating about how he has this gut issue and that it's going to kill him and all that, and that I'd have to drag him out of the woods one year. And I didn't think anything of it at the time, but then that year he like missed our scheduled lunch to come out of the woods, and then I was like panicking, and I'm like, oh my God, he was telling the truth. He wasn't lying. Holy shit. So I was running through the woods trying to find him. He was like an hour late to lunch, and I'm climbing this big hill where he was hunting in the snow, and I'm like shedding all my deer hunting clothes because it was hot running in the snow and all that. And then I get to the top of this hill where he should be up in a tree and wearing blaze orange. He should be like a lighthouse, and there was no blaze orange. And so I literally thought, I'm like, everything he said was going to come true. I'm going to have to, can I drag him out of the woods? Can I drag a 200-pound man out of the woods? I started trying to remember CPR and, and mouth to mouth and all that. And then all of a sudden I hear my dad's voice say, hey, Scott, what are you doing? And I'm like, and I look, and he's walking towards me, and I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, well, what are you doing here? And I'm like, well, you're late for lunch, like 2 hours late, because it was like an hour running there. And he's like, no. And he pulled out this railroad watch. And it was this railroad watch that me and my brother and my sister had given to him like 10, 15 years ago, and he looked at it, and he's like, huh, I must have forgot to wind this son of a bitch before we came out of the woods. And so this whole existential thing that I had was this railroad watch that hadn't been wound up. So I told that story in class, and I look over, and Terry Davis is crying. And I'm like, whoa. And he's like, now that's a good story. And then I was like, wow, maybe this is my thing. So then after that, I switched majors and did creative writing instead. So, and now I'm here.
Wow. Well done.
Yeah.
So what year was that you told that story?
94 was, no, it was, I started in 91. So 91 was engineer, 92 was engineer, 93 was trying to be an English teacher or teacher. So 94.
94. And according to what I found out, your first published book was done in 2000.
Yeah. Yep.
So what happened in the 6 years in between?
grad school, and then I had kids starting in 2000. But yeah, I went to grad school, and then also I was managing the nonprofit group that we started during that time. So I was, and also I was writing poetry because I was actually a poet, growing up. And that's actually another funny story, because after the Terry Davis class, I really got into writing. I took more classes, I met more people, and we started Blue Skunks actually started with a workshop group, and we all met in my apartment, and we'd bring stories and read them, and everyone would critique them and all that stuff. Um, and then one day, ever since Terry cried at my story, I was like, God, I'm really good. I'm just awesome. I had massive, stupid, dumb ego. And we're in this group, and my best friend who started the group with me, after the group had gone and we're smoking cigarettes, and he said, we're in my kitchen, and he's holding on to my pages, and he's like, you know what you should do with these pages? And I'm like, I don't know, send them somewhere to a magazine. You think a publisher would publish it? And he's like, oh. And he took a Zippo, struck it, burned my manuscript. And I'm like, what the hell, dude? And he's like, you need to read poetry. You need to understand language at a much deeper level. You need to understand the musicality of language. You need to understand this, and then you need to try and write poetry. Because if you master poetry, then when you write prose, it's going to naturally sound better because you know how phonetics work and all this. And so that was like my flight or flight moment, where I could run away, curl up like a lima bean in the shower and cry that someone burnt my story, or I could listen and take his advice. And so that's what I did. I just started absorbing a ton of poetry, and then started writing it, and trying to get a better grasp of that. And then when I wrote my thesis at Mankato, I wrote a poetry collection that was actually a story about two people. One is dying, and the girl is dying, and the boy or man, they're taking this cross country trip to the Pacific Ocean because she'd never seen the ocean, so he's taking her there to see it before she passes. And so all the poems were like different parts of that journey, but it told this story, end to end, much like Sharon Olds's book, Father, her book of poetry. So it still had a story component in it, and then like another learning thing I learned after I got into poetry is that there's even a less of a career as a poet than there is as just a regular writer. And so then I started, applying, like my best friend had said back then, applying those poetry principles to prose, and started writing stories again. And then that's how I got some of the books, at the local children's publishers, and that was a lot of fun getting a chance to write some graphic novels. I'd never known how that medium worked, and learning that process was cool. So yeah, that's kind of my poetry hiatus there for a bit.
That's
I never
wonderful.
for the longest time I thought the word poet couldn't be said without prefacing it with the word starving.
Yeah, yeah, that or wearing a beret or a cape,
Well, well, that
something
too.
like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. You can starve with a beret and a cape too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
So I have a couple. It's funny how our stories interlock in different ways. So I went to Mankato in 2005 as a graduate student studying literature, but because I always liked creative writing, I took workshops just whenever I could.
Yeah.
And I took one with Terry Davis. And at the time, I was reading a bunch of experimental fiction, and I don't know, I just liked weird stuff. And so um, he when it was my time to bring a story in, he gave everybody a handout on what experimental fiction is because he was like, you could tell, like he was like, oh God, it's one of these. Like it clearly was not his jam, but I mean, he
Yeah.
was such a wonderful teacher and just
Yeah.
very supportive. And but anyway, that's my Terry Davis story.
Yeah.
So
Terry was he was one of my favorite. I mean, all the professors there were really great, but Terry just resonated. Not saying that other ones didn't care, but he seemed to take a more one-on-one approach with everyone as far as,
yeah,
here's what you should do. My buddy that works, at Skywater with me, he took a workshop with Terry one time, and Terry's comment on his story man, did you have any fun writing this? And he keeps that one tucked in his hat
yeah,
every time as one of those ego melters, so
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, for sure. Tell us about your newest series.
My young adult series, the Lost Zenith series, that actually stems from Mankato too. Because I've always been a comic book reader, and the comic books always, factor DC and Marvel factor in like the multiverse, different universes, and stuff like that. And then I took an astronomy course as part of my engineering degree, And I went in there, and the professor walks in, and he must do this with every class, but it just blew my mind. He walks in and he's like, if the universe is infinitely expanding, um, he said that means any thought, any idea, any choice you make exists somewhere in that infinite multiverse. And I was just like, I didn't listen to anything else the rest of that lecture, because I'm like, wait a minute. So there's somewhere out in the multiverse, there's a version of me that is, dating whatever hot lady there is right now. And it just like, then it made me go back and read the multiverse comics. I'm just like, wow, what a what a canvas to have to, like,
Yeah.
study like identity and stuff like that with like characters and stuff like that. And so that's what the Lost Zenith kind of focuses on. And it's kind of my gimmick, because I wanted to put my characters through different book genres and kind of, learn how to, work on that type of genre and stuff. So the multiverse is my tool to get my characters into different situations in different genres. So
Hmm.
the first book was kind of like, taking tropes and ideas from like Treasure Island, and that, and doing kind of like a pirate fantasy type thing. And then the second book is kind of like the golden age of comics type thing, and actually it's probably more inspired by those old, 30s, 40s, and 50s radio plays like The Shadow and stuff like that, which I always, I mean, and I'm a kid of the 80s, so it wasn't like there was a lot of those going on at the time, but I had a communications class that we studied a lot of those, and I always thought they were so cool. So yeah, so the second one is that. The third one is like a traditional like Mary Shelley, Bram Stoker monsterverse type stuff.
Gothic.
Yeah, with a little steam in there. And the fourth one will
Yeah.
be science fiction. Then I'm ending it at book 6 with, I think it's science fiction, and then high fantasy, and then a western. I'm gonna last
Nice.
type thing. So
I love it.
That's
What a
wonderful.
great series. You should
well,
know that we're
and I did it because I actually met with an agent on the first book of that one, and the agent said, "Well, you can't do this," and I'm like, "Why?" He's like, "Oh, well, we can't do this." I'm like, "Who's we?" And he's like, "Well, the publishing world." And I'm like, "But why?" And he's like, "Well, you should really stick to one thing." And I'm like, "But why?" I'm very sympathetic when I get confronted with stonewalls. And they kept saying it's just too hard for the publishing industry to like market you
can't
as
handle
with
it.
different genres and stuff. I'm like,
Where do we shelve you? Is it in
yeah,
westerns?
That's
Is it
it.
in?
That's it.
Yeah.
We're
and
not
so I
gonna
was like,
put you on your shelf.
whatever, dudes. So then when we started Skywater, had all these manuscripts going. I'm like, well, if we need test subjects, something to test the editorial process, feel free. Use mine, whatever. I don't care if they make money or not or whatever, but at least it'll get us all to learn, these processes that we're building. So I'm the guinea pig for Skywater. But by starting it though, we got things like we got Tommy Mischke that wanted to publish with us. We got other people that wanted to publish us, and then leading to like this Apex thing, and we're getting other ideas. There's actually one that came in that was a memoir that the pitch to it, we don't have the manuscript yet, but the pitch to it was like, oh, that's really good. So hopefully that one will work out for us too. But yeah, so hopefully that answered the question.
So I usually, well, and we'll ask you what you're working on now also, but before we get to that, I noticed May you have a completely different book coming out,
Yes.
Gray Duck. Tell us a little bit about that. What's that? What's its origin?
This one is kind of my baby, and the origin is hilarious because I'm a Harry Potter fan as well. I read all the books, and when I came across Hermione's magical bag, that she like stored a bunch of stuff in, I was like, wow, that's cool. Obviously it doesn't exist in the real world, maybe in the multiverse, I don't know. But I was thinking about that. I'm like, God, that's cool. And I was like, but what if that bag fell into the hands of someone not so morally and ethically sound as Hermione Granger? So I thought of this character that found an old buckskin drawstring satchel or whatever in an Ojibwe burial mound, and then finds out that it's like you can put stuff in it and it just disappears, it goes away. And then so it's basically a story about this runaway teenager that has this bag, and he gets kind of stuck into the Polish mob in Chicago, kind of getting rid of evidence and being a bagman for the mob. Um,
Literally a bagman.
yeah,
A literal bagman. Yeah.
and and then just kind of exploring that idea of a kid that's in this circumstance. He's got this new life because he ran away from home because the bag, finding the bag also led to other things in his childhood or whatever. And then ultimately his past comes back to haunt him, and he has to figure out if it's worth it to try and leave the mob, which usually you can't, or try and have it both ways, which you also probably can't. But I wrote it, and the great thing about the book that I love the most is I have my Blue Skunk friends still, and we all read each other's stuff. And when it was done, I gave the manuscript to my friend James, and he was reading it, and I was on the bus coming home from work one day, and he texted me, and he's like, "Next time I see you, I'm punching you in the face." And I'm like, dude, what the hell did I do to you, man? Why are you gonna punch me in the face? And he's like, I'm at that chapter, and there's one chapter in the book that some bad stuff happens, some really bad stuff, and he's like, I can't believe you did that to that character. I'm in my office here at the wherever he was working, and I'm crying my eyes out. I had to close my door so people didn't see me crying, but I can't believe you did that to that character. And I'm like, oh, I'm like, that's awesome. Yeah, feel free, go ahead, punch me, because that's kind of what I want readers to experience in that chapter. So it's been my baby ever since then. Even my wife, who's my biggest critic, she doesn't like my YA books because it's science fiction and multiverse and stuff. But she's like, you have to figure out a way to get that one published, because that's the best thing you've ever done. So I'm like, yeah, so that's coming out, and yeah.
Wonderful.
But Gray Duck, what's the
Grey Duck is kind of that's his nickname in the mob since he's from Minnesota.
Okay,
So they call
Gotcha.
him Jimmy the Grey Duck.
sure. All right. Gotcha.
Love it.
Okay. And we ask our guests to read a little something so our listeners and viewers can get an idea or a flavor of your writing. You got something that you could do that, or
Sure, let me pull it open here, and then I'll read
excuse me.
a little bit of the opening chapter for you. All right. So yeah, this is the first chapter of Grey Duck, and the book has interweaving like the settings and timelines. The main timeline is in 2010 in Chicago, and then every other chapter is there's a like the timeline from 1988 and what happens, when he was a kid, and how things went from carefree, teenager life to, really bad stuff. So chapter 1 takes place in Chicago in the winter of 2010, and it's called A Loose End. For decades, Chicago's Admiral Theater had entertained every creed of con man, from common drunks and corrupt cops to gangsters and dealers, not to mention the seedier elements like pedophiles and politicians. Every shade of criminal and shit for brains had at one time passed through its dark back rooms. If you're lucky, you found yourself in the parlor with a redhead playing your pipe, and if you're unlucky, you bled out in the back alley with the stars spilling across the sky while your vision faded. I don't know why I felt above it all. I was no better than all these fucks, but strip clubs never sat right with me. They were below the station of decent men. And was it wrong to think I had a shred of decency left in me? I wasn't lost yet. The whole place seemed alien. The main catwalk jutted out into a slew of tables, hairy hands groping tight-fisted with cash. The music thumped and dubstepped, the lights careening off disco balls, glittered nipples, and rhinestone heels. An epileptic seizure bloomed in my brain. I felt faint, like I had rushed up a flight of stairs and stood trapped on the verge of passing out and falling to the darkness below. Most of all, I felt eyes on me, watching me, judging me, pulling my good deeds from the bad. A whisper hid somewhere behind my ear, faint and unintelligible. There you are. I forced a breath. Relax, I told myself. 20 years on the job, and I still had to remind myself. My right knee bounced in agitation. I even had my goddamn arms stretched over the table, palms down, like I needed the world to stop spinning. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small bottle of Xanax, crunched down a few to take the edge off. Jimmy, Rusty yelled over the music. Sweaty, he threw himself next to me in the booth, spilling some of his beer on my satchel. I pulled it closer for safekeeping. The Beretta 92 hanging from the shoulder holster inside his coat banged against the table. He wore a cheap brown suit and a matching pork pie hat. Tit glitter covered his face. You look like you're about to toss your fucking cookies, man. Get up. Take a stack of tens and fill some fucking G-strings, brother. I retracted my arms and took a pull from the tumbler of Jameson in front of me, lit up a cigarette to combat my shaking hands. I'm out of place. I don't belong here. Everyone is out of place, he said. Then, like he remembered something important, he pointed at me and added, you should have seen the new waitress the other night. She'd make you feel right at home. I'd stuff more than her panties. I shook my head, smoked, drank, still not interested. Rusty sidled closer, sucking air through his teeth like I was a misbehaving child. He lit up a cigarette, relaxed a bit. He said, I get it, dude, I do. You and Vic's daughter, bloodlines, he exhaled. You don't want to fuck that shit up. I get it. He scanned the club as if looking for someone he couldn't find. But she's not here, bro. Rusty had a mouth like an outboard motor set to fuck yeah, but he never thought past the words spilling from his lips. Vic Corsack didn't get to run the Polish outfit in Chicago by being a chump. He had eyes in every doorway, fingers in every cash register, and shotguns under every counter. I looked toward the bar where Vic's left-hand enforcer, Lucky, sat. Black Merc stocking hat, black leather duster, Fonzie white tee, jeans and combat boots, Sam Elliott-style stash. Silently, he slammed tequila shots and kept a wary eye out in the crowd. Enforcers always came in pairs, one loudmouth fucktard with his thoughts like puke on his sleeve, and another as sullen as an abandoned church. I turned back to Rusty. Not taking that chance, Russ. Rusty squinted at me. All this lone wolf, always on the job shit'll kill you, man. You have to free ball more often. Loosen up. My phone vibrated inside my coat pocket. I was dead once. It's not fun. I reached in and pulled out my burner phone, an unknown number, but I knew damn well who it was. I flipped it open and said, hello? Vic. He only said one thing. You could use a good ribeye, kid, and he hung up. Ribeye. Charles Mrozek, Vic's second in command, lover of thick-ass steaks, the future head of the outfit. Vic had long wanted to retire. Everyone knew that. He had a villa in Greece lined up for him and his wife. His departure meant a power shift. Someone had to take over, and it had to be clean. No infighting, no crazy shit. It was a wise choice, and I had to deliver that message. Someone new was in charge. I put the phone back in my pocket while stuffing my cigarette in the ashtray. Rusty smiled. Punching in? I grabbed my old leather satchel and slid out of the booth. Night shift. Rusty lifted his beer to me. Powodzenia. And that's the...
Nice.
Very cool. I want to read more. I mean, I'm just amazed at the breadth of what you have written. I count 18 books of one shape, kind or another, ranging from books about animals to the multiverse.
Yeah.
Is there any limitation on what you might write? I mean, you're still a young man.
No, I don't like to put limitations on what to do. And, you know, even like one of my books, there's one I wrote called Grotesque for a middle grade audience. A publisher asked me to pitch ideas to them. And so the one I wanted to do was a Western with zombies. I was like, God, that would be so cool. And so I wrote a pitch for that, and then I wrote like 2 other pitches, and I just threw out 2 other pitches because I really wanted to do the Cowboys and Zombies one. Well, one of the other pitches was this really stupid, you know, romance story about a blind girl that falls in love with a gargoyle that comes alive during the night. And so I sent those off, and I'm like, oh, and I started writing the zombies and cowboy one. And then the editors came back and like, these are all great, but we really want you to do the romance one. I'm like, I'm like, son of a. So I had never written a romance story. So then I had to start reading some romance books and all that. But at the same time, even though I didn't want to do it, it was a learning thing, you know, to go ahead and, you know, learn some of those tropes and archetypes and stuff like that and how to play with them and do it. So yeah, I don't like to have limits, much like that agent said, oh, you can't do all of that. You got to do one thing. My answer to that is always BS.
I think everybody on this podcast has run into that. Oh, you can't do that. You can't cross genre because I had one agent tell me, well, just go look and see where you are going to fit on the shelf. You know, look and see where your book's going to fit. And, you know, then you can understand. So I did that. I went to a little bookstore and I looked and my book fell right between James Joyce and Franz Kafka. And I was just, and I thought, I think I'll quit now.
Yeah.
I was going to bring up grotesque because anybody who can write from the point of view of a gargoyle, I thought was exceedingly talented. So, um,
Yeah, that was a fun endeavor because I mean, again, it's different things to do, and again, it was kind of like the whole multiverse thing too. Is well, in another universe somewhere, maybe gargoyles do come to life. So
yeah.
yeah, it was a lot of fun, even though it wasn't what I wanted to write for them.
Yeah, it
Oh,
is funny. I mean, the idea of I don't know. I've always enjoyed authors who wrote different things, and
yeah,
I feel like, in general, like if I like their writing, I'm
Mhm.
probably going to like whatever they're excited about. Whatever that happens to be. And so I
Yeah,
never quite understood that whole pigeonhole thing.
yeah,
As a writer, I always want to try something different.
yeah.
So like yeah, I'll write a biography. I'll, write science fiction. I'll write a contemporary, literature kind of thing. Like it's just, and I haven't told Bob this because I think I'm nervous to reveal it, but I guess I will anyway because I've alluded to it. But I've decided that I'm going to try my hand at a mystery because somehow I ended up in this writing group with all these mystery people, and then, and I hang out with all these mystery people, and it's like rubbing off. And I finally came up with an idea that I think is funny. So,
I knew we'd finally push you into killing somebody
Yeah,
eventually.
yeah.
Yeah.
right,
I have one more question before we
yeah,
get to our lightning round. And according to your bio, you have a deaf husky named Rocket.
Yes, I do.
So have you ever thought about writing a book through Rocket's point of view?
We actually, me and my daughters, actually, during the pandemic, we thought about it, putting together like a series of, children's books with Rocket, being deaf and stuff. And we actually had one of their friends was like a designer or an illustrator, and they were gonna, come up with the imagery for it. But we never got past the pandemic part of it. But I always liked that idea of, like, I forget what the famous dog is that rescued Timmy in the well. Was it Lassie or whatever? I was
Lassie,
like,
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
what would
Lassie.
Lassie be like if Lassie couldn't hear? So there
Yeah.
wouldn't be like, boy, where is he? Where's Timmy or whatever? Rocket
should
would be
get
like,
really
huh?
good at reading lips, I guess. So,
Yeah,
Yeah, really. Sign paw.
yeah.
No.
oh man,
Okay.
so Rocket named after a Rocket Raccoon or something else?
Uh, we named him, yeah, after Rocket Raccoon, but because he's got the traditional markings of like a husky, but he's got the little mask on or whatever.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And so, but the name that the shelter gave for him was, it was like all these pop culture references with Game of Thrones and stuff, and I'm like, it had like 8 names. I'm like, well, we can't have 8 names, so we need something simple. So so the girls were fans of Rocket Raccoon, and I obviously am, and I have this my thing that I do with my girls when, I'm feeling, doom scrolling or whatever, is I doom scroll cute animal videos like raccoons and kittens and stuff, and then I send them to them as kind of my way to share, little animal pictures.
Palette
So
cleanser of some sort.
yes,
There
there's
you go.
nothing like
Yeah.
after a long day and you're just like, what on earth is this world? Like everything that's happening in this world right now. I keep telling, my wife Jen, I'm like, I think we did go through the multiverse. We ended up in the bad timeline. I don't know what the hell's going
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. The
yeah,
whole
at the
whole
end of
thing
the day,
flipped.
scrolling and watching kitten videos or raccoon videos. I mean,
Oh, baby goats.
baby,
Yes,
baby
baby
goats
goats.
Baby goat. I
too. Yeah,
love baby
Yeah.
goats.
yeah,
The
baby
boing,
goats are.
boing, 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 boing. You know.
All right, so I'm going to kick off our lightning round wrap up kind of personality things. And as a fellow comic book nerd, I'm kind of curious. I mean, the easy question would be Marvel versus DC versus Independence, but given your X hat, I assume Marvel, and I saw an Avengers tattoo, so I assume Marvel is probably the preference of the two.
Yes.
So instead, I'll ask favorite X-Men.
Favorite X-Men, Wolverine, just because, um, as a product of a Vietnam Marine and my father, there's always a lot of rage in our household. So I really identified with Wolverine and his inability to control that. And when I had kids of my own, I kind of fell into that same kind of bucket that my dad did, and it really made me stop and think and say, I need to do better. I wanted to like learn to control it, that something that Wolverine couldn't or can't with his berserker stuff. And then also because he was short, I mean, in the comics, he's like 5'3", and so he was always this little ball of energy and anger, and he was the one to go into every fight, and he didn't care because he had an adamantium skeleton and healing factor or whatever. But you have like Colossus and all these other bigger folks, and he just goes into the fray and gets business done. So I always like Wolverine, but I mean, what I love about Marvel Comics versus DC, at least at the time, was Marvel Comics. They always had every character had a flaw. Whether it be
Yeah.
Captain America's his moral code is often his flaw because he can't do certain things. And Wolverine had his rage that he couldn't control. But I always liked the fact that Marvel characters always had some kind of flaw that they were trying to overcome, and that's why I gravitated towards them.
Yeah, much the same, actually. I enjoyed that, like imperfection. Like I
Mhm.
felt, I mean, the polar opposite, I think, is Superman. I mean, when you
Yeah,
look at Superman and like all the good, and people have done a really good job of
yeah,
complicating him. Like the
yes.
fact that he can't save everybody but wants to,
Hmm.
and feels guilty about not,
Yeah,
about having to choose who he saves is, his kind of flaw. But it's
yeah,
it's much more convoluted than like you said. I have uncontrollable rage, or I can't control, the laser beams or whatever kind of thing. So, but
yeah.
So you mentioned your childhood, I guess that's a
Mhm.
couple of times, but so is there a particular lesson from your childhood that still sort of guides you or haunts you, today?
It doesn't necessarily haunt me, but it really it kind of was a analogy for, I don't know, life or whatever. But my first time I went out hunting with my dad, we were hunting grouse, and a rabbit happened to run through the trail. So my dad shot at it, and hit it, and it was sitting there in the grass and it was squealing, and it was squealing like 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 terribly,
they
and I
make
told
the worst noise, I
Oh, they
swear.
do,
Oh my God.
and so I walked up to with my shotgun and I said, Dad, I can finish it off. I can finish it off, to stop the squealing and put it out of its misery or whatever. And my dad's like, no, no, hold on. And he stepped over and he grabbed the rabbit and just broke its neck, and he didn't say anything about it, but what I took out of that event was numerous things like, you know, don't waste a bullet when your hands will do, um, don't, make sure that take care of something that's suffering and all that. But it was also this like, it was a stark reminder of his time, in the war, where he always told stories of, you know, in the war, like when you smoked a cigarette, you always you cupped it so that the enemy couldn't see the ember, or like when they would go to the bathroom out there, they would go up against a tree so it wasn't splattering, so there was more stealth, and everything about everything my dad did was like, it was still reminiscent of being a Marine in the jungle. Even to the fact of, um, when we were kids, my dad never like sneezed like normal people sneeze. He always held it in, And so me and my brother and everyone around, we followed dad, and that's how we sneezed too. It wasn't until I got into grade school when everyone else was sneezing normally, and then finally I asked my dad. I'm like, why do you do that when you sneeze? And he's like, well, in Vietnam, if you sneeze like that, someone's gonna kill you. And it was just a subtle thing that my dad learned that then we just learned. But it was just so stark, and that so many little things that you take for granted in life, in some situations you can't do because it could mean your life. So hopefully that
Wow.
answers the question.
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
that's really interesting, and it's I'm kind of I'm surprised and I guess happy to hear that he actually talked about those experiences, because so many of our veterans come home not wanting to talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But and they have the same, right. It still overshadows their life. They just
Yeah.
don't explain why.
Yeah.
So,
We actually had a
Mm.
moment a few years ago. He asked me if me and my wife would fly him out to Pittsburgh to visit his war buddy from the war, and we're like, yeah, of course, no problem, we'll do that. And he never spoke much of this man named Gary, and so I just assumed it was just a war buddy, and so we went over there and we sat on their porch and we ate Amish donuts and drank lemonade, and I started hearing stories I'd never heard before, about the war. And one of the stories was when my dad got wounded. Gary was the man that, um, you know, dressed him and stuff, and then also tried to get a chopper in to get him out. And he was eventually successful, under fire and all that stuff. And that day again, just stark in my memory. It's just like, so I never heard of this man. This is the man that saved my dad's life, and I had
Wow.
never heard of him until now.
Huh.
And
Isn't
then
that funny?
later that night, we were at a Pittsburgh Pirates game because he likes baseball, and we're having a beer together. And I told him, I'm like, Dad, do you realize that if Gary hadn't done that, you know, I definitely probably wouldn't be here, and you probably wouldn't be here enjoying this beer at this game. And he's just like, he always does this, and it just he's like, I would have found my way out of there. I'm like, of course you would, of course you would. I get it, but
Sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
So
We-
go ahead.
We probably need to wrap this up because we've got another one coming up in a few minutes.
Yeah.
So love to sit and just chat and listen to your stories all morning, but unfortunately,
Lightning round me.
Well, my last question would be the one that Michael usually asks, and that is, what do you like to cook?
I like to cook everything. I'm actually kind of a foodie because my mom, she was okay, but she was like an army cook back when I was a kid. But then when I moved out, I was like, I definitely am not going to eat tuna casserole 3 nights a week. So right now it's soup season, so I'm bending into soups. I made a really great lemon chicken stew a couple weeks ago that my wife loved. So yeah, I like to cook, not bake. Baking I suck at, but my daughter's good at it. But yeah, soups and stuff
Okay.
like that.
All
Cool.
right.
Well,
Michael,
my
you gotta find one.
final last question, which is actually just a plug kind of question, which is, do you have a favorite bookstore? Some place that you like going, or some place that stocks your book, or both? Maybe it's both of those.
The bookstore that I'm probably closest to is the one in Excelsior. I go there a few times, and usually when author friends are there, I go there when they have readings and stuff like that. So I forget what it's called.
Is it Excelsior Bay Books? I think
so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I never know the name. I just know where it is, and I just go there. Just go in there. So
All right.
and it's right near the lake. It's actually it's really pretty right there for sure. So cool.
Well, Scott, thank you ever so much for spending some time with us this
yeah,
morning.
it's fun.
It's been a pleasure. You're a fascinating person, and I don't know that I'll read all 18 of your books at this point in time, but I will definitely read Gray Duck when it comes out.
Yeah. Cool.
And we'll be sure to include links to your webpage so people can find your books and all those things as well, obviously in the description. So, but yeah, thanks so much for joining us. It was wonderful chatting with you, Scott.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun.
And don't forget, you can see this book and more from Minnesota authors in the Bell Cow catalog, heading to libraries and indie bookstores across Minnesota and beyond.
Thanks for tuning in to the Bell Cow Author Roundup podcast. We'll be back next Tuesday with another amazing Minnesota author.